So in 2010, NUS published the Hidden Mark study, which produced a staggering statistic that 68% of all respondents had been the victim of at least one kind of sexual harassment on campus while they'd been at university. So on the back of that, NUS started a campaign called That's What She Said, and it's to look into what lad culture is and why specifically lad culture might be the root cause of sexual harassment that women were experiencing at university. So I guess my question to you guys is, what does lad culture mean to you? And what kind of role do you think it might play in sexual harassment? I'm gonna start with you.
All right, fine. Lad culture is sort of like, how would you put it? Sort of hyper-masculine sort of promotion of masculine traits to the disadvantage and putting down of the more sort of feminine things. So I mean, it's like promoting sports, yeah, big lads, whatever, blah, 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 blah. But the fine arts, like poetry and stuff, that's seen as gay, and like you can't. I mean, no offense, Ben, but it's like you can't enjoy those things when you're in that sort of environment. So it's a very sort of top-heavy machismo.
Okay. What about things like theatre? Is that considered?
Yeah. I mean,
okay.
If I went to my rugby team, like, well, I love going to the theatre, but if I was open with that, they'd be like, that's a bit weird.
So how all-pervasive is it, have you found, in sporting culture? Does it like permeate down to the things that you can wear, the things that you can say? I know there was a huge scandal fairly recently, actually, about the LSE, right?
And don't even get me started.
Right. And they had these pamphlets, right, that had homophobic and I think racist slurs.
Do not
so to what extent do you think that this kind of stuff is pretty institutionalized within sporting culture?
It goes hand in hand with the sporting culture, but it doesn't have to be part of that.
Got it.
So I mean, especially at Kings, we've started to, I mean, like with your Rainbow Laces campaign, like, did you hear about that?
I'm sorry?
The Rainbow Laces campaign?
Oh, something to do with Raw. Do you want to tell us about it?
Yeah, I'll let Ben take over.
Well, it was, the rugby team this year have worked to promote, sort of to not have such a masculinized culture within it. So they wore like rainbow laces to varsity, the game there and things, even though perhaps from my perspective, because it was a Stonewall campaign and there's certain problems with that, at least I see that move and the calendar as well as a positive step forward. Even though I think there's a long way to go with the sporting culture at Kings, I think it was definitely a step of recognition that more has to be done for LGBT people in particular, but also to remove the sort of hyper-masculinity that seems to pervade.
I guess I've got two questions coming off the back of that, and I think you might have something to say on that as well. Just in terms of, to what degree do you think, so obviously we're bringing awareness to something when we talk about it and when we engage in those kinds of gestures, but obviously I think there's always going to be the sensation that that stuff's a bit hollow, that we're not actually getting anywhere by making grand statements. And I think there's also the danger that commodifying things isn't necessarily revolutionary, right? So getting people to buy more things, or to buy more calendars, that contributes to that kind of maybe ecological concerns, or like maybe other kinds of commodification. So what do you think that, do you have anything to say?
Well, I like that point very much, and I think we've got to kind of stress that the key elements of this kind of discussion is the awareness raising, particularly amongst kind of males. And this is a kind of great thing about this kind of initiative and the campaigns that have been mentioned, is that men can kind of self-reflect, just as we're trying to do at the moment as well. And it's a really important thing, because part of this hyper-masculine kind of culture that we're kind of imbibing in the universities, as you described, actually is kind of narrowing our kind of thought processes and how we kind of perceive ourselves. And for me, one of the negative aspects of masculinity is its limiting nature, how it kind of conditions us into this very kind of narrow kind of set of societal expectations where we're aggressive, we're obnoxious, we're very kind of acquisition kind of orientated, and then we objectify women as well, most kind of pervasively. And this is where the kind of link is between the kind of this culture and how it kind of manifests very kind of negatively in the kind of statistics that you kind of began the set with.
Yeah, so off the back of that, so we're talking about how masculinity is restrictive to men. So so there's a violence to masculinity in the ways in which it's inflicted upon men. But how do you think that reflects on on men that don't necessarily wear masculinity as well?
I think, yeah, in some ways, using masculinity in this sense is kind of unhelpful, because I think one of the aims of gender equality should be that everyone is able to have the freedom to express themselves in the way that comes naturally to them, regardless of their gender. And I think sometimes using masculinity in this sense, you know, the idea of being a big burly man who likes sports, who doesn't like theatre, for example, isn't into the arts. I think, you know, that's unhelpful, and that's one of the preconceptions that we have to change, that actually there's nothing less inherently masculine about enjoying the arts, about interacting in a non-traditionally masculine and aggressive way.
I think the problem is that it's reduced what it is to be masculine to a certain set of traits which are harmful not only to perhaps the individual themselves but also to their interactions with others, and then it says you have to behave like this to conform to this norm and to act like that, whereas I think masculinity can be a much broader thing. Like outside of that, it just needs to be, the scope needs to be widened of it.
I mean, that's the thing though. I mean, I feel very conflicted about ideas of expansive masculinity, you know, masculinities that embrace the different ways of being. So there's been, I think, a couple of poster campaigns for, like, you know, men against rape, right? So posters of men being like, you know, we wouldn't do that, we wouldn't hurt her, like, or we'd use our strength in different ways, or like different kinds of campaigns like he for she, or like campaigns basically that, to me at least, seem to still preserve masculinity as a construct. So sure, we're expanding it, we're, you know, trying to use the word strength in different ways, we're trying to expand what those words might mean, but we're not really challenging what it is to be masculine. We're still maintaining what it is to be a man, and eventually that is predicated on inequality and hierarchy.
That
right?
is the real problem. I'm not sure either whether the concept of masculinity is now so far ingrained that it is completely predicated on that. I'm not sure whether the scope can be broadened. If it can still be preserved without those facets, it can be. But I'm not sure now whether it is still predicated on all of these really negative, reductive forms of behaviour, and whether it's worth saving almost, or whether we have to find some other facets to express ourselves that aren't within that medium anymore.
Well, also all forms of oppression are relational,
Yes.
right? So masculinity only exists in relation to the kinds of oppression that it can inflict upon people who aren't masculine, right? Regardless of their gender. And I mean, I think that exists for other forms of oppression as well, like race. So whiteness can only really exist in relation to something else. So what might it mean to have, say, positive whiteness? It sounds ridiculous for me to even say. So how is it that we're able to say that masculinity can be framed as something positive when we wouldn't necessarily say that, you know, use that in other forms of oppression?
Can I
Yes,
respond to this? So I think there's there's the physicality aspect of being masculine, and then there's the kind of the personal traits as well. So you've got the physicality refers to kind of the aggressive kind of stereotype, and then the kind of personality bit is the kind of traits of being assertive, quite confident, and kind of being self-reliant. And these are actually quite positive attributes. So there can be some kind of, you know, and it's terrible that we typically associate them with kind of masculinity themselves. It's actually a kind of it's a type of behaviour which shouldn't apply to any set type of individual groups within society. But that's something that's positive, that we could actually kind of use. That should be something that's accessible to everybody across the kind of board, not just the kind of strength and kind of imposing our physical will, but also encouraging everybody to have their kind of the freedom to kind of express themselves and kind of, you know, be aspirational and do those types of things. We go.
I think physicality is an important point. Where would you think trans men might fit on that spectrum?
That's an interesting question. I mean, let me just get my thoughts together. I mean, I think trans men, I mean, physically, do the hormones change your physicality?
You don't have to.
No.
You can just
Yeah,
it's
you
not
can just self.
reductive
Right. Okay. No, I
features.
mean, I'll bow to your superior knowledge on this, but yeah, I've no idea, to be honest. I mean,
I guess what I'm really trying to get at is when we're unpicking what it is to be masculine, we're still, when we
There's
talk
still
about the
reductive.
gendered aspects, we still seem to be circling back.
I don't know whether it's that useful a feature to have anymore. I'm really conflicted about it, and whether it can be expanded to incorporate trans men, for example, or other areas of the queer community, even gender bending.
So
I don't know, so it's difficult.
I think my personal opinion is I think the future is moving away from using masculine and feminine as ways of defining behavioural characteristics or physical characteristics. And I think the issue of trans men is really interesting, because it makes us, it makes people think about what defines masculinity. And I think like I say, I think the future is thinking of the future is not seeing masculinity and femininity as being a dividing line. Because also, if you were talking about the positive aspects of masculinity, saying that this is a positive aspect of masculinity, say assertiveness and self-reliance, kind of implies, like you said, it's relational. It implies that doesn't apply to femininity, which I think is damaging. But similarly, you can say some things about the positive aspects of femininity not applying to masculinity. So I think we should move away from using it.
I think we should just take the best of both worlds and try and combine them to reach a sort of equilibrium, as it were. So
okay, so I feel like we're circling back to the point, well, a lad culture then that is predicated on violent masculinity, which is often aggressive, violent, assertive masculinity, is it necessarily very helpful to achieving gender equality, right?
No.
So